The rain had just begun to fall, soft, cold, and relentless. When I stepped out of the cab, the hem of my black skirt sweeping through puddles like ink spilling across concrete. A storm was brewing, not just in the sky, but in my life. Behind the iron gates of the Blackwell estate, time stood still, frozen in marble, money, and memory. I wasn't just walking into a job, I was stepping into the past, a past I'd buried under decades of marriage, motherhood, and silence. But fate, as it turns out, doesn't forget. And sometimes, the man you thought you lost forever waits behind a door you never meant to open. After my husband passed away, my son gave me an ultimatum: get a job or get out. I was desperate, so I agreed to become a live-in caregiver for a paralyzed billionaire. But what happened on my very first night left me frozen. Stay with me until the end, and let me know which city you're watching from. I want to see how far my story travels. The funeral lilies were still drooping on Mark's grave. When my son gave me his ultimatum, I was standing in the kitchen, the same kitchen where I had made meals for decades, when Ethan walked in, wearing the expression he always did when a decision was final, and my opinion no longer mattered. "Mom, we need to talk," he said, setting his leather briefcase on the granite counter with a snap. At 42, Ethan had his father's commanding voice, but none of his empathy. "This arrangement isn't working anymore." I was still in my black dress from the funeral, still numb from saying goodbye to Mark, my husband of 45 years. My hands trembled as I reached for the coffee pot. "What arrangement?" I asked gently. "You living here in my house?" His tone was all business. "Dad left everything to me, remember? And I can't keep supporting you." The cup slipped from my hand, shattering on the tile. Coffee bled across the floor like my life unraveling. "Ethan, it's only been 3 weeks since your father passed," I whispered. "I know," he said without even glancing at the mess. "But life doesn't stop, Mom. I've got my own family and bills." I knelt slowly, my 68-year-old knees groaning. "I have Social Security. I can help with $800 a month," I offered. Ethan let out a dry laugh. "That doesn't even cover utilities." "But I've thought of something." I paused, looking up at the boy I used to rock through fevered nights, the same child who once ran to me during thunderstorms. "What kind of something?" "There's a job, private caregiving. The pay's excellent," he said, pulling up a listing on his phone and shoving it toward me. "He needs full-time care. You used to be a nurse before you married Dad. It's perfect," Ethan said, his voice flat. My stomach sank. "Ethan, I haven't practiced nursing in over 40 years. Things have changed. I wouldn't even know where to start." "It's not medical," he replied quickly. "It's more like companionship, helping with daily routines. You can do that." He was already tapping away on his phone again. I reached out. "They want to meet you." "You what?" "You have an interview tomorrow." I stood slowly, tiny ceramic shards still pressed into my palm. And then I asked the question I was afraid to hear the answer to. "And if I don't get the job?" Ethan finally met my eyes, and I already knew what he would say. "Then you'll need to find somewhere else to live." "I'm sorry, Mom, but I can't carry you forever." The next morning, I stood in front of a mansion so large it looked like it belonged in a movie. The driveway alone was longer than the street I used to live on. My hands trembled as I pressed the doorbell. How had it come to this? At 68, I was applying for a job I wasn't even sure I could do, all because my own son had pushed me out. The door opened, revealing a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense expression. "Mrs. Walker?" she asked. "I'm Angela, Mr. Blackwell's house manager. Please, come in." The inside of the home made the outside look modest. Polished marble floors, grand crystal chandeliers, oil paintings that probably cost more than my entire nursing salary back in the day. Angela led me through an endless hallway lined with portraits of people who'd clearly never had to worry about bills or Social Security. "Mr. Blackwell needs help with daily activities," Angela explained. "He's been paralyzed from the waist down since an accident 5 years ago." She glanced at me. "The position includes room and board, and a very generous salary." We stopped outside a set of heavy double doors. "Before we go in," she said, lowering her voice, "you should know, Mr. Blackwell can be difficult. He's had 17 caregivers in the last 2 years." My heart dropped. 17? Angela opened the doors to reveal a stunning library, sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. Beyond the polished shelves and velvet armchairs sat a man in a wheelchair, facing the garden. His hair was silver, his features strong, hauntingly handsome in a way that must have turned heads in his youth. "Mr. Blackwell, this is Nora Walker, the candidate I mentioned." He turned to face us, and the moment our eyes met, something inside me shifted. His eyes were a piercing, unforgettable blue, like old photographs or forgotten dreams. The kind of blue you only see in old photos or distant memories. When his gaze locked with mine, something flickered across his face. Recognition? Confusion? I couldn't tell. "Mrs. Walker." His voice was rich, composed, with just the faintest trace of something I couldn't place. "Please, have a seat." I eased into the chair across from him, doing my best to ignore the quickening rhythm of my heartbeat. There was something about him, something in his eyes, the lines of his face. It made my chest tighten in a way I didn't understand. "Angela mentioned you were a nurse," he said, though his eyes never left my face. It felt less like conversation and more like examination, like he was searching for something. "Yes, sir. A long time ago before I got married," I answered, my voice surprisingly steady. "And your husband, he passed recently." It wasn't a question. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you," I murmured, glancing at my hands, still wearing Mark's ring. "It's been difficult." When I looked up again, Mr. Blackwell was still staring at me with that same intense, almost urgent expression. "Have we met before, Mrs. Walker? There's something familiar about you." My stomach turned. I forced a small, polite smile. "I don't believe so, Mr. Blackwell. I'm sure I would remember." But even as I said it, unease crept up my spine, because something about him was familiar. The curve of his mouth, the way he tilted his head when he spoke. My hands trembled in my lap. "Perhaps not," he murmured, though he didn't sound convinced. "Tell me, Mrs. Walker, why do you want this position?" The real answer sat heavy in my chest. I had no other option. My son had made it clear I wasn't welcome. At 68 I was too old and too weary to start over, but I had no choice. Instead, I said, "I've always believed in taking care of people. It's what I do." Something in his expression softened. "And you're not afraid of difficult situations?" I thought of Ethan's cold stare, of the broken coffee cup I cleaned up while he stood by, of sleeping in the guest room of a house that used to be mine. "No, sir, I'm not afraid." Mr. Blackwell nodded slowly. Then he glanced at Angela. "Would you mind giving us a moment?" She left without a word, closing the double doors behind her. He wheeled his chair closer. "Mrs. Walker, let me be honest with you. I'm not an easy man to work for. I'm demanding, particular. I don't tolerate incompetence. But if you accept this role, you'll be treated with respect and compensated well. Very well." Then he named the salary. It took everything in me not to gasp. It was more money than Mark had made in his best year. "But more importantly," he added, "I need someone I can trust. Someone who won't gossip or pity me. Someone who won't treat me like I'm broken. I need someone I can trust. Someone who won't gossip about my life or treat me like a burden. Can you be that person?" I met his gaze, those impossibly blue eyes, and felt that strange flicker of recognition all over again. "Yes, Mr. Blackwell, I can." "Good," he said, extending his hand. As our fingers touched, a jolt shot through me, not from static, but something deeper. Something I didn't want to name. "Welcome to my home, Nora." The way he said my name, soft, almost reverent, sent a ripple down my spine. I pulled my hand back quickly, scolding myself. I was imagining things. I was a widow, a grandmother. I had no business feeling anything for this man. But I couldn't deny it. That single touch had stirred something I hadn't felt in decades. Something old and startling, like the soft echo of a melody I thought I'd forgotten. But as Angela escorted me to my new quarters later that evening, I couldn't shake the sense that my life had just shifted. Suddenly, irrevocably. The way Mr. Blackwell had looked at me, like I was a ghost from his past, left me uneasy. I'd spent 48 years trying to forget. That first week at the Blackwell estate felt like living in a gilded cage. The room Angela assigned me was larger than the apartment I'd once shared with Mark. It had its own sitting area, its own bathroom, sparkling white tile, polished brass fixtures, luxury in every corner. But every morning, when I woke up, the weight returned. At 68, I was a live-in employee, a servant. Mr. Blackwell was just as Angela had described, precise, demanding, and sharp-tongued when the smallest thing went wrong. Coffee at exactly 7:15. Not a minute late. newspapers arranged by section in the right order, medication given with unwavering consistency, and heaven help me if I missed a single detail. But there were moments in between, quiet pauses, when I'd look up and catch him watching me, eyes narrowed, as if trying to piece together a long-forgotten memory. In those moments, something in his gaze unsettled me. Not unkind, not cruel, but searching, deep and vaguely haunted. As if the sight of me stirred something in him too. I'd tell myself it was nothing, yet my heart would still stutter in response. "Nora," he said one Thursday morning as I laid out his breakfast tray, "that's not a common name." I paused, knife hovering over the grapefruit. "Family name," I answered softly. "My grandmother's, she was German." "German," he repeated almost to himself. "And where did you grow up?" "Here and there," I said quickly, keeping my tone even though my hands had started to tremble. My father moved around a lot for work. Not a total lie, we had moved often, though not for work. More like running from unpaid bills, broken leases, and the trail of my father's gambling debts. But some memories were better left where they belonged, in the past. Still, his questions lingered in my mind long after breakfast. Was it curiosity, recognition, or something else? I wasn't sure which possibility frightened me more. That afternoon, while Mr. Blackwell napped, I finally unpacked the 3 cardboard boxes Ethan had reluctantly let me take from the house. Most of it was practical. Clothes, toiletries, a few dog-eared books, my jewelry box. But at the very bottom of the last box, wrapped carefully in tissue paper, was something I'd forgotten I even packed. Photo albums. I must have grabbed them absent-mindedly, probably because they were still sitting on my nightstand during those first sleepless nights after Mark's funeral. Now, alone in a velvet chair by the window, I unwrapped them with shaking fingers. The tissue paper crinkled like a whisper from the past. I hesitated, fingers resting on the worn leather cover, bracing myself for the flood of memories that would inevitably follow. The first one was from our wedding. The first album held memories of Mark, our wedding day, baby Ethan, family trips to the coast, a lifetime captured in safe, respectable moments. I set it aside and reached for the second one, the one I rarely touched. The cover was worn, faded blue leather, the corners cracked with age. Inside were photos from a life I had neatly packed away, a life before Mark, before Ethan. Before responsibility wrapped itself around me like a winter coat I couldn't take off. The first few pages were tame. High school graduation, my old nursing school classmates, my parents, still youthful and unaware of the struggles ahead. But then, as I turned to page 12, something shifted. My breath caught in my throat. There I was, 20 years old, wearing a yellow sundress I had sewn by hand. My hair was long, dark, pulled back with a ribbon. I was laughing, head thrown back in joy at something the photographer had said. And beside me, with one arm wrapped around my waist, his face glowing with the kind of smile that could shatter any heart, stood a young man with dark hair and eyes like oceans after a storm. Terry Blackwell. My hands trembled so violently I almost dropped the album. Not Terrence. Terry. Terry, who had adored jazz and dark chocolate ice cream. Terry, who used to say I looked like sunshine in that yellow dress. Terry, who once whispered, "I'll marry you the minute I make it." Terry, who kissed me goodbye on a train platform 48 years ago and never came back. I could still remember the way his lips felt on my forehead that morning, how tightly he'd held me like he was afraid to let go. The way he'd promised it wouldn't be long, that he'd return before the leaves turned again, and how I'd believed him with all the faith a 20-year-old girl could muster. I stared at that photo until my eyes stung, trying to connect the boy in the image with the man in the wheelchair downstairs. The cheekbones, the jawline, the intensity of the eyes, they were the same. But the Terry I knew had been full of fire, wild ideas, impossible dreams. This Mr. Blackwell, he was composed, cold, hardened. What had happened to change him so drastically? How had the boy who once wrote me poems on napkins become the man who now barked instructions about his medication with military precision? I pressed my palm to the page, half expecting to feel warmth radiating from the paper, but it was just glossy and cold. Empty. Like a memory sealed behind glass. With trembling fingers, I turned another page. There we were at the county fair, sharing cotton candy, dancing barefoot in my tiny apartment while the upstairs neighbor pounded on the ceiling in protest. Sitting by the lake, my head resting on his shoulder, both of us clinging to the belief that love alone could carry us anywhere. And then, there it was, final photo, taken the morning he left. We stood on a train platform, his suitcase at his feet. My cheeks were wet with tears. I remembered that day with perfect, painful clarity, standing on the train platform, his hands cupping my face, his voice shaking with conviction. "I'll be back in 2 years, Nora, rich enough to give you the life you deserve." His eyes had been glassy, but determined. "I'm going to build something, an empire, and when I do, I'm coming back for you. Will you wait for me?" And God help me, I'd said yes. I meant it, every word. But 2 years stretched into 3, then 4. His letters became infrequent. Then they stopped altogether. By the time the rumors began that he'd struck gold in real estate, I had already met Mark, sweet, reliable Mark. He didn't make grand promises, but he gave me something real. Safety, steadiness, love without conditions. He never set my world on fire, but he kept it from crumbling. In those quiet moments when grief and doubt whispered cruel things, Mark was there, offering his hand, his heart, his unwavering presence. We married 6 months before I heard from Terry again. The letter was still there, tucked behind the last photo. I slid it out with shaking fingers, though I already knew each line by heart. "My dearest Nora, I did it. Everything I said I would and more. I'm coming home next month, and then we can finally begin our life together. I bought us a house, our house. I can't wait to carry you over the threshold as my wife. All my love, all my dreams, all my tomorrows belong to you. Forever yours, Terry." The letter was dated 3 weeks after my wedding to Mark. I pressed it to my chest. Tears slid down my cheeks, warm and unrelenting. All these years I told myself Terry had forgotten, that his promises had been the reckless dreams of a young man high on ambition. But he hadn't forgotten. He had kept his word. He had come back for me. I was just already gone. And in some cruel twist of fate, our timing, the one thing love could never control, had unraveled everything. I had chosen a path that led away from him, not because I stopped loving him, but because life doesn't wait for letters that never come. A gentle knock at the door startled me. I scrambled to tuck the album and letter beneath a pillow, then wiped at my face quickly. "Come in." Angela stepped inside, her brow creased. "Mrs. Walker, Mr. Blackwell is asking for you. He seems unsettled." My heart leapt. Had he remembered? Was that why he'd been watching me so intently? I followed her downstairs, my hands trembling at my sides. My pulse thundered as we neared his study. He was facing the gardens when I entered, his back to me. When he turned his chair around, the expression he wore stopped me cold. It wasn't his usual composed indifference. It was something else, something raw, exposed. "Nora," he said softly, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth." I clasped my hands tightly, trying to still the shaking. "Of course, Mr. Blackwell." He studied me for a long moment. "Have you ever been to Millbrook? It's a small town, maybe 2 hours north of here." My breath caught. Millbrook. That was where I'd grown up, where I met Terry, where I fell in love for the first time. I'm not sure," I lied. But my voice cracked, just enough for him to notice. His gaze sharpened, those piercing blue eyes locked onto mine. "There was a place there," he continued. "Murphy's Diner, I think, and a little lake where people used to go on Sundays." I felt the color drain from my face. "Murphy's. Where Terry used to buy me cherry cokes and make me laugh until my sides hurt. The lake where he kissed me under the stars for the first time." "Mr. Blackwell," I said softly, "I think perhaps you're mistaking me for someone else." But even as the words left my lips, I knew he didn't believe them. The calm, controlled mask he wore was slipping, and underneath I saw the man I once loved with everything I had. "Perhaps," he whispered, though his eyes never wavered. "Perhaps I am." I turned to leave. My heart pounded in my chest. And then I heard him say something so familiar, so intimate, my knees almost gave out. "Yellow dress. You always looked beautiful in yellow." I didn't sleep that night. Every time I shut my eyes, I saw his face as it had been at 20, heard his voice on that train platform, felt the ache of everything we'd lost. And somewhere downstairs, I imagined him lying awake too, sorting through the same memories that were unraveling me. By morning, I knew I couldn't pretend any longer. He was remembering, more with each passing day. And if we didn't confront the truth, it would consume us both. I found him in the conservatory, the sun streaming through the glass around him as he read the morning paper. For a brief moment, the light caught in his silver hair, and I saw both versions of him at once. The boy with wild dreams, and the man time had weathered. "Good morning, Mr. Blackwell," I said, placing his coffee exactly where he liked it. My hands were calm now. Steady. He looked up from the paper. There was something hollow in his eyes. "Haven't slept," he murmured. "Neither have I," I said. A smile, small, tired, touched his lips. I kept thinking about yellow dresses and cherry Coke at Murphy's. My breath hitched. There was no use denying it now. "You always said it was too sweet," I replied quietly. "Told me to get vanilla instead. But I was stubborn." His eyes closed. When they opened again, they shimmered with unshed tears. "Nora Elizabeth Carter, you wore your grandmother's locket and had a scar on your left knee from falling off your bike on River Street. When you were 8, he said softly. I instinctively touched the base of my throat where my grandmother's locket used to rest. "You gave me a ring," I said, my voice catching. "Just a little silver band. You said one day you'd replace it with diamonds." He nodded. "I still have it." His voice dropped to a whisper. "So do I. I've carried it with me for 48 years. We stared at each other across the sunlit space, not just the few feet between his wheelchair and my chair, but across time itself, across different lives, different choices, different versions of love. "Why didn't you tell me who you were?" he asked. I sank into the chair across from him, the weight of my age settling into my bones. I felt every one of my 68 years. "Because I was afraid," I admitted. "Because I'm not the girl you remember anymore." I paused, my throat tightening. "Because you're not the boy I remember either," Terrence nodded slowly. "When I came back," he said, "and found out you'd married Mark Carter, I was angry. I told myself you'd never loved me, that you were just waiting for something better." "That's not true," I said sharply, too sharply. "I waited, Terry. I waited until I couldn't anymore. Your letters stopped. You just disappeared. I thought—" I wiped a tear from my cheek. "I thought you forgot me." "I never stopped writing," he said quietly. "But the men I partnered with in those early years, they convinced me a small-town girl would hold me back. They intercepted everything, told me you'd moved on, that you'd married." His words hit like a punch to the chest. All those years of silence, of wondering, of heartbreak. And he'd been trying to reach me the whole time. "I hired a private investigator," he went on, "to keep an eye on you. I know how that sounds, but I wasn't trying to interfere." My eyes widened. I had to know you were okay." He looked down at his hands, then up at me again. "I knew when Ethan was born, when you moved to the house on Maple Street, when Mark got promoted, and when he got sick." "You've been watching me," I whispered. "For 48 years? He nodded again. "I never reached out, never crossed that line, but I kept hoping that maybe one day, fate would find a way." He reached into his jacket pocket and carefully pulled out a small velvet box. My breath caught. His fingers trembled as he opened it. Inside was a simple silver ring, the same one he gave me all those years ago. The same silver ring, the one I had returned to him, tears in my eyes, the day before my wedding. I couldn't bear to wear one man's promise while giving my life to another. "You kept it," I whispered. "I kept everything," he said, still looking down at the ring. "Every photo, every letter you ever wrote, every memory." Then he met my eyes. "I never married Nora. I told myself it was because I was focused on building the business. But that was a lie." He swallowed hard. "The truth was, no one else was you." The weight of those words dropped between us like a stone into still water. 48 years of silence, of walls, of watching from afar while the person you loved built a life with someone else. "Terry," my voice failed me. "How do you apologize for a lifetime that neither of you chose?" "You don't have to explain," he said quickly. "You made the right choice. Mark was a good man. He loved you the way you deserved. And he was there when I wasn't." His voice faltered. "I've made peace with that." I looked at him carefully. "Have you?" I asked gently. "Because the man I've been caring for these past few weeks doesn't seem like someone who's at peace with anything." His jaw tightened. "The accident changed me," he said after a long pause. 5 years ago, I was still holding on to the dream that maybe, someday, you and I would find each other again. That maybe there'd be a second chance." His eyes flickered with something raw. "But I woke up in a hospital bed, paralyzed. and I realized how foolish I'd been. What could I possibly offer you now? I'm a broken man in a wheelchair. Stop. I stood abruptly, my chest tightening with anger. Just stop, he blinked, startled. Do you think I'm that shallow? That I care more about your legs than your heart? Do you honestly think I would walk away from someone I love just because they needed help instead of giving it? He was quiet, stunned. I loved you, Terry, I said, my voice trembling. Not your future fortune, not your big plans, you. The boy who brought me wildflowers because he couldn't afford roses. The boy who held me when I cried about my father. The boy who believed in dreams so fiercely, he made me believe in them too. Tears spilled from my eyes, 48 years worth of emotion, surging through me like a storm finally unleashed. And if that boy is still somewhere in there, I added, then everything else is just details. Terry reached for my hand, and I let him take it. His fingers were thinner now, aged and marked by time, but his touch still sent a spark through me. He's still here, he said softly, buried under a lot of bitterness and regret, but still here. He looked up at me with a question in his eyes. So what do we do now? I looked around at the conservatory, the grandeur, the life he'd built, then back at him. Are you happy, Terry? I asked. Really happy? He was silent for a long time. I was successful, he finally said. I was respected, he said. I had more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. He paused. But happy? No, I haven't been truly happy, not since the day I left you on that train platform. I took a breath, my voice soft but steady. Then maybe, it's time we stop punishing ourselves for choices we made when we were different people. Maybe it's time to find out what the people we are now could build, together. Terry brought my hand to his lips and kissed it with a gentleness that made my heart ache. Would you be willing to try? He asked. Not as my nurse, but as whatever we could be to each other? I thought of Ethan, of that cold house that no longer felt like mine. I thought of the lonely apartment I'd planned to rent, of nights spent alone, growing older with only silence for company, of mornings where I'd wake to no sound but the radiator clicking, and evenings spent staring at a muted television, pretending the quiet wasn't deafening, of the ache in my chest that never truly left after Mark died, until now, sitting here across from Terry. And then I looked at the man who had loved me, for nearly 5 decades, even from a distance. Yes, I whispered, I'd like to try. Even as the words left my lips, I knew this wouldn't be simple. Ethan would have plenty to say, and I doubted any of it would be supportive. He'd never approved of anything that shifted the spotlight away from him. He was used to being the center of my world, the sun around which I was expected to orbit. And I had let him believe that for too long. The idea of facing my son's judgment sent a ripple of anxiety through me. But for the first time in weeks, I felt something else. Hope. Maybe second chances weren't just for fairy tales after all. 3 weeks after that afternoon in the conservatory, Terry asked me to move into the master wing. Not as his caregiver, but as his companion. The word felt strange on my tongue when I said it out loud. Companion. It meant more than employee, yet didn't carry the old weight of the vows we once dreamed of. It felt like something in between, like a bridge between who we were and who we might become. A promise that didn't need rings or ceremonies. You don't have to decide now, he said one evening over dinner in the smaller dining room we'd taken to using. It was cozier, more personal than the formal space with its chandeliers and silence. But I want you to know, Nora, this isn't about convenience or fear of being alone. His eyes met mine, unwavering. This is about the life I should have lived, with you. I set my fork down. My appetite had vanished. Terry, there's something I need to tell you. His expression shifted, serious, concerned. What is it? It's about Ethan, I said, carefully. He doesn't know who you are. When he found this job for me, all he saw was a wealthy man in need of care, and a mother he wanted out of his house. I hesitated. He has no idea about our history. Terry nodded slowly. And you think Ethan will have a problem with our arrangement? I laughed, but there was no warmth in the sound. My son threw me out less than a month after his father's funeral. He cares about exactly 2 things, his comfort and other people's money. I stirred my tea absently. When he finds out I'm living here, as more than hired help, he's going to assume I'm after your inheritance. Are you? Terry asked, his voice quiet. I looked at him, stunned. How can you even ask that? Because 48 years is a long time, Nora, he said, gesturing around the softly lit dining room. People change, and wealth has a way of changing how people see me. His words didn't just sting, they cut deep, stirring something inside me I thought I'd buried long ago. The quiet indignity of always being underestimated, of always needing to prove I was enough. I stood abruptly, the accusation slicing through me. If that's what you think of me, then maybe this was a mistake. His voice was gentle but firm. Please, sit down. I didn't move. I had to ask, he continued. I've been burned before, Nora. People who said they loved me but really loved what I could give them. I needed to hear it from you. I crossed my arms. Say what? That I'm not here for your money? That I care about you? I shouldn't have to say it, I added, my voice rising. You should know it. He reached for my hand, but I pulled away. You're right, he said. I should know, and deep down, I do. But when you have this much, you start to question everything. Everyone. His voice faltered. Even the people you love most. That admission struck a nerve. It wasn't cynicism. It was pain. A deep old wound that had never fully healed. Suddenly, I didn't see a man accusing me. I saw someone afraid, terrified of being used, terrified of being alone. Something in me softened. The anger began to ebb. Is that really how you've lived? I asked. Not trusting anyone? He nodded slowly. Pretty much, it's lonely, but it felt safer than being hurt again. I could see it now. The high walls he'd built, one betrayal at a time. Each smile he questioned, each friend he doubted, all of it piling up until even love became suspect. I sat down, my gaze on him, really seeing him now. The man time had carved, the lines around his eyes, the tension in his jaw. This was what success without love had made him. Guarded, doubtful, alone. For the record, I said, my voice low, I don't want your money. I want you to leave every cent to charity if that gives you peace. I took a deep breath. I have my Social Security, a small pension from the hospital I worked at before Ethan was born. It's not much, but I've survived on less. Relief softened his expression. I'm sorry I had to ask. Don't apologize, I said. Just don't ask again. I picked up my fork and took a bite of the salmon Patricia had prepared. Now, I said, swallowing, about Ethan. When he finds out about this, he's going to cause trouble. Terry's expression hardened. What kind of trouble? He'll probably demand to know what your intentions are. She might try to sue, I warned. Claim I'm manipulating you. She could even try to have me legally removed from the house. Let her try, Terry said, his tone hard as steel, the same voice, no doubt, that had built his empire. This is my house, Nora. No one tells me who I can or can't invite to live in it. His words rang with certainty, but I couldn't stop the tremor that passed through me. I wished I could borrow even a fraction of his confidence, to wrap it around myself like armor. But Terry hadn't raised Ethan. He hadn't seen how quickly my son could turn affection into ammunition. He didn't understand the quiet cruelty behind that polished, respectable mask. My phone buzzed on the table, interrupting my thoughts. Ethan's name flashed across the screen, and my stomach twisted. Speak of the devil, I murmured, showing Terry the display. Answer it, he said, calm but firm. Let's get this over with. I swiped to accept the call. Hello? Mom? Ethan snapped. His voice was clipped and tight with restrained fury. I just had the most interesting chat with Mrs. Keller from church. She said she saw you at the market with some guy in a wheelchair, and that you were acting very familiar. I closed my eyes. Of course, someone had seen us. This town was too small to hide anything for long. Terry and I had gone to the grocery store the day before. He'd insisted on picking up the ingredients for the chocolate cake I'd mentioned from my childhood. We must have looked closer than employer and employee. His name is Terry Blackwell, I said carefully. He's the man I work for. Work for or work on? Ethan snapped. Because according to Mrs. Keller, it looked very cozy, not exactly professional. Terry motioned for the phone, but I shook my head. This was my battle. Ethan, I said firmly, I'm 68 years old. I think I'm capable of handling my relationships appropriately. Are you sleeping with him? He asked, the question slicing through me like a slap. That's none of your business. It is, if you're dragging our family name through the mud, he shot back. Dad's not even cold in the ground, and you're already throwing yourself at the first rich man who gives you attention. The words hit with the force of a fist. My hand clenched around the phone, knuckles white, How easily he dismissed my grief, my dignity, as if my entire existence was meant to orbit his comfort. For a moment I was speechless, not from guilt, but from sheer stunned fury. White-hot rage surged through me. "How dare you?" I hissed. "Your father has been gone for 2 months. I mourned him with every piece of my soul. But I'm not dead, Ethan. I'm still here, and I am allowed, no, entitled to companionship." "Companionship?" Ethan laughed. Cold, derisive. "Is that what we're calling gold digging now?" Terry's face went rigid, pale with fury. He motioned for the phone again, sharper this time, and I handed it to him. "Mr. Carter," he said, his voice glacial. "This is Terry Blackwell, and I believe there are a few things you need to understand." Silence on the other end. Then Ethan's voice returned, tight, forced, suddenly respectful. "Mr. Blackwell, I didn't realize you were there." "Clearly," Terry said coldly. "So listen very carefully, because I won't say it twice. Your mother is not a gold digger. She's not embarrassing anyone, and she's certainly not throwing herself at me." His voice dropped lower. "If anything, I'm the one pursuing her." "I think there might be some misunderstanding," Ethan began. "The only misunderstanding," Terry interrupted, his voice sharp as ice, "is your belief that you have any say in your mother's personal life." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "She's a grown woman, fully capable of deciding who she spends time with. She doesn't need your permission, approval, or oversight." "But she's vulnerable right now," Ethan insisted. "She's grieving. She might not be thinking clearly." "Nora is one of the strongest, clearest thinking women I've ever met," Terry said firmly. "The fact that you don't see that says more about you than it ever could about her." Silence. And then Ethan's tone shifted, cool, detached, calculating. "Mr. Blackwell, I appreciate your friendship with my mother, but I hope you can understand my concern. She's been through a lot. I just want to make sure she isn't being taken advantage of." Terry's voice dropped to a low, dangerous calm. "The only person who's taken advantage of your mother recently is you." Another pause. Then Ethan again, his voice colder than ever. "I'd like to meet with you, Mr. Blackwell, in person, to discuss this situation properly." Terry looked at me, raising one brow. I hesitated, then nodded. Better to face Ethan directly than give him time to scheme behind closed doors. "Fine," Terry said into the phone. "Tomorrow afternoon, 2 o'clock. Ethan hung up without saying goodbye. Terry handed my phone back, his jaw set. Well, that went about as well as expected. I exhaled and slumped back in my chair, the weight of the exchange crashing over me. "She's gonna try to turn you against me," I said, my voice low. "She'll make it sound like I manipulated you, like I planned all of this." "Let her try." Terry reached across the table, gently taking my hand. "Nora, listen to me," he said, steady and sure. "I didn't survive 48 years in business by being easy to manipulate, and I sure as hell didn't build this life by letting others dictate who I'm allowed to care about." "She can be persuasive," I whispered. "And I can be stubborn," he said with a small smile. "Your son doesn't scare me. The only thing that scares me is the thought of losing you again." That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, dreading the confrontation that waited just hours away. I knew Ethan would arrive armed with charm and suspicion, with accusations dressed as concern. He'd cast me as a desperate widow clinging to the first man who showed her kindness. He'd call me reckless, foolish, selfish. He'd question my intentions, my integrity, even my right to seek happiness again. But as sleep began to claim me, I held tightly to Terry's words. "The only thing that scares me is losing you again." Tomorrow was coming, and I would be ready. I would soon find out if Terry's confidence in me could truly stand the weight of reality. Ethan arrived at exactly 2 p.m., dressed in his sharpest navy suit, crisp as if he were walking into a courtroom rather than his mother's life. I watched from the second-story window as he stepped out of his car, adjusted his tie, and checked his reflection in the side mirror. Even from that distance, I could see it, the calculation in every movement, the squared shoulders, the expressionless mask he wore like armor. A soldier ready for battle. Terry had insisted we hold the meeting in his study, not the sunroom or one of the more welcoming parlors. "If he wants to treat this like a negotiation," Terry had said, "then let's give him a proper boardroom." Patricia showed Ethan in, and I felt my stomach twist as his eyes swept the room. The antique shelves, the oil paintings, the desk, solid walnut, and likely worth more than Ethan's annual income. I could almost see the dollar signs dancing in his pupils. "Mr. Blackwell," Ethan said, extending a hand smoothly. "Thank you for seeing me." Terry shook his hand briefly, unreadable. "Mr. Carter, please, have a seat." Ethan sat across from him, legs crossed, fingers steepled with practiced ease. He looked every inch the polished attorney he was. Cool, composed, calculated, but I saw it, the tension in his jaw, the way his fingers twitched just once against his knee. "I want to begin by saying this comes from a place of concern," Ethan said, his voice laced with feigned warmth. "My mother's been through a lot recently. I worry that she may be making emotional choices instead of rational ones." "What kind of choices?" Terry asked, voice mild. But I knew that tone. The ice beneath the surface was real. "Well, for starters," Ethan said, flicking a glance toward me, "her moving into your private quarters, that's highly unorthodox for a caregiver. It raises some questions." "What kind of questions?" Terry asked again, tone the same, but colder now. Ethan leaned forward slightly, keeping his voice low and earnest. "Questions about boundaries, about professionalism. Mr. Blackwell," he continued, "I'm sure you're a fine gentleman, but my mother is vulnerable right now. She's grieving, she's not in a strong financial position, and she may be misinterpreting gratitude for something more." Heat rose in my cheeks. "Ethan, that's enough." "It's all right, Nora," Terry said without taking his eyes off Ethan. "Let him speak." Ethan glanced at me with something that felt like a warning, then turned back to Terry with renewed poise. "My mother has always been impressionable," he said smoothly. "She tends to see the best in people, often to her own detriment. In her current emotional state, she may not be thinking clearly about the implications of this situation." "And what implications would those be?" Terry asked evenly. "Well," Ethan said with a shrug, "there's the obvious concern about public perception. A widow moving in with a wealthy man so soon after her husband's death. It doesn't look good." His voice softened into that mock concerned tone that made my stomach churn. "And then," he added, "there's the question of what happens when this arrangement ends." "Will my mother be left with nothing again?" Ethan asked, voice tinged with faux concern. "Will she have to start over one more time?" Terry leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled in front of him. "Those are interesting questions," he said. "Tell me, Mr. Carter, what do you think would be best for your mother?" Ethan's eyes lit up, clearly thinking he'd found the angle he needed. "I believe she should come home, back to her family, where she belongs, where she can grieve properly and make rational decisions about her future." "And by home," Terry's tone sharpened, "you mean the house you inherited from your father? The house you asked her to leave?" Ethan's jaw tensed, but he tried to keep his smile. "That was a misunderstanding. I was emotional, processing my own grief." "Of course," Terry nodded. "So your mother is welcome in your home?" "Yes," Ethan said, though his voice cracked slightly. "Always." "For how long?" "Excuse me? How long would she be welcome?" Terry repeated calmly. "Until you decide she's a burden again? Until your wife says she wants her guest room back?" Ethan's facade slipped for a moment, the polished professional replaced by the calculating man beneath. "Mr. Blackwell, I don't think you fully understand the complexity of family relationships." "Oh, I understand them perfectly," Terry said, voice cold and clear. "I understand that you evicted your mother 3 weeks after burying her husband of 45 years. His words hung in the air like a thunderclap. "I understand that you gave her an ultimatum, work or be on the street. And I understand that the only reason you're sitting in this room now is because you've realized she might have found something better than what you offered her." Ethan's cheeks flushed. "That's not fair," he snapped. "I was trying to protect her, to teach her independence." "By making her homeless?" Terry countered. "She wasn't homeless," Ethan said quickly. "She had options." "Such as?" Terry asked. Ethan's gaze bounced between us, rattled. "She could have found an apartment. With $800 a month in Social Security?" Terry said, his tone deadly quiet. "Do you know what the average rent is around here, Mr. Carter?" Ethan said nothing. Terry continued. $1,200 for a one-bedroom in a modest part of town." Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it again. "So your mother would have been $400 short every single month, just to keep a roof over her head. That doesn't even include food, electricity, prescriptions. any of the other basic costs of survival. She could have found something cheaper, Ethan muttered. Where? Terry asked. What neighborhood were you willing to let your 68-year-old mother move into, alone, just so you and your family wouldn't have to be inconvenienced? I watched the exchange unfold, torn between two emotions. Satisfaction, because someone, at long last, was holding Ethan accountable for his coldness, his entitlement, his blind ambition. And sadness, because that someone had to be a stranger. Not the voice of his own conscience. It stung more than I expected. This realization that my own son could not see me clearly, could not find it in his heart to defend the mother who had poured herself into his life. That truth throbbed like an old bruise, freshly pressed. Ethan's polished facade was beginning to crack. The confident tone had turned defensive. His posture a little less sure. You don't understand, he snapped, desperation creeping into his voice. My mother, she's always been difficult, high maintenance. She expects people to take care of her. High maintenance? I felt my heart twist. I can't listen to this, I said, rising to my feet. Ethan, I worked 2 jobs to help you through law school. I cared for your father through 5 years of cancer without a single complaint. I babysat your children every weekend for free, and all I ever asked in return was a place to grieve the man I loved for nearly half a century. You were smothering me. Ethan snapped, the mask finally slipping. Always hovering, always offering help, always making me feel guilty for having my own life. I needed space to breathe. So you threw me out, I said quietly. I gave you a chance, he said, his voice sharp. A chance to stand on your own 2 feet for once. My chest tightened at his words. A chance? That's what he called abandonment now? My grief had been raw, fresh, and instead of comfort, he'd offered exile. The silence that followed was razor sharp. Terry looked at Ethan, his face unreadable, except for the flicker of something colder than I'd ever seen in him. Mr. Carter, he said slowly, I believe we're finished here. Wait, Ethan's voice cracked with urgency now. You don't know what you're getting into. My mother, she has expectations. She's not just looking for companionship. She'll want marriage, legal protections, security. Terry's expression didn't flinch. And what if she is? He asked. What if I want to give her those things? Ethan froze. What are you saying? He asked. I'm saying, Terry replied calmly, that your mother and I are adults. We're capable of deciding what our relationship is, what it becomes. Whether it stays as it is now or becomes something deeper is none of your concern. Ethan's voice dropped to a whisper, something deeper. Terry reached into the top drawer of his desk and pulled out the velvet box I knew so well. The same one he'd shown me weeks ago in the conservatory, the one that held the silver ring from our youth. Your mother and I have a history, he said, holding the box gently. A history that goes back long before your father, before you, before anything you think you know about her life. I watched Ethan's throat move as he swallowed, hard. His eyes flicked from the box to my face and back again, searching for a lie that wasn't there. Ethan's eyes locked on the box like it was dangerous. What kind of history? The kind that matters, Terry said simply. We loved each other, deeply. Life separated us, but it never destroyed what we had. He paused, and now, 48 years later, we have a chance to find out if that love can survive time, distance, and change. You're talking about marriage? Ethan said, his voice flat. Lifeless. I'm talking about the life we should have lived all along, Terry said, steady as stone. Ethan turned to me, fury blazing in his eyes, fury I'd never seen before. This is why you took the job, isn't it? He hissed. You knew who he was, you planned this entire thing. No, I said, firm and unwavering. I had no idea Terry was here when I answered the listing. I thought he was dead or married or living in Europe. The last thing I expected was to find him, in that wheelchair, in this house. The moment I saw him, something cracked inside me. But that wasn't a scheme, it was memory. It was love trying to breathe again after a lifetime buried under responsibility. Terry, Ethan spat, his voice thick with venom. You call him Terry. That's my name, Terry replied calmly. Terrence is what my investors call me. Terry is for the people I love. Ethan shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is insane. You think you can just pick up where you left off? After 48 years, you think you can erase everything? We're not erasing anything, I said. We're trying to build something new from what's still standing. My voice shook, not from doubt, but from the enormity of what I was claiming. The past was real. So was the grief. But maybe, just maybe, so was this chance. What about Dad? What about your marriage, your family, everything you spent a lifetime building? Your father was a good man, and I loved him, I said, my voice soft. But Terry was my first love, and some things never really end. The room felt smaller, tighter. Ethan's disbelief hung in the air like smoke, bitter and thick. Ethan looked between us, eyes darting, panic growing. He's using you, Mom, he said. Can't you see that? He's lonely. He's disabled. You're convenient. And when he gets tired of this little house-playing fantasy, you'll be on the curb again. That's enough. Terry's voice cracked through the room like a thunderclap. You will not speak to your mother that way, in my house. Your house? Ethan scoffed. Oh, let's talk about that. Let's talk about your money, your power. That's what this is really about, isn't it? Terry didn't flinch. Instead, he opened a drawer and pulled out a thick legal folder. Since you're so concerned about wealth, perhaps you should know, I've already updated my will. Everything I own, this estate, my accounts, my company shares, it's all going to charity. The Children's Hospital, the shelter, the Rescue Foundation. The silence that followed was deafening, like the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. Ethan's face drained of color. You what? I told him to do it, I said. I don't want his money, Ethan. I never did. I just want him. The truth felt like a release, like opening a window after years of stale air. I looked at Terry, and in his eyes I saw it reflected, recognition, devotion, and a steadiness that had nothing to do with his fortune. Something in Ethan's face crumbled then. Just for a moment, he wasn't the steely attorney or the calculating son. He looked like the little boy who used to cry for me after nightmares, wide-eyed and scared and uncertain of the world. It was a flash, a breath of vulnerability, but it vanished just as quickly. But then, the mask returned. Hardened, colder. Fine, he said, voice like ice. Fine. Throw your life away on some fantasy from 50 years ago, but don't come crawling back when it falls apart. She turned sharply, one hand still on the polished brass handle. And don't expect me to be there to pick up the pieces when he's done with you, Ethan said coldly. The door slammed shut behind him with a force that made the windows shiver in their frames. Terry and I sat in silence, letting the echo of his departure settle. We listened as his car started, then disappeared down the long gravel drive, the hum of the engine fading into nothing. Finally, Terry reached across the table and gently took my hand. Are you all right? I paused, letting the question sink into me. I took stock of the ache in my chest, the sting in my eyes, the quiet that filled the room. My son had just stormed out of my life, called me a gold digger, told me I was a fool, disowned me in the most humiliating way. But for the first time in what felt like years, I breathed easily. The weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying had lifted. Yes, I said, surprised by how steady my voice was. I think I really am. 6 months later, I stood in the same sunlit conservatory where Terry and I had first unwrapped the fragile memories of our past. But everything had changed. The morning light caught the glint of the simple gold band on my left hand. Not the extravagant diamond Terry had once promised in the letters of our youth. No, this was something far more precious. Something chosen not by who we were at 20, but by the people we had become in the decades since. We had married quietly 3 weeks earlier. No guests, no music, just us, Patricia, and Terry's attorney to witness the vows. It wasn't the wedding I'd once dreamed of, but it was perfect in every way. Mrs. Blackwell, Patricia said as she entered, her usual professional tone softened by the hint of a smile tugging at her lips. Even Patricia, ever practical, ever efficient, had grown fond of our strange late-in-life romance. There's someone at the front door asking to see you. My breath caught in my throat. I'd been expecting this moment. Dreading it, really. Ever since our marriage was announced in the local paper, I knew the news would reach Ethan. He hadn't called, hadn't written, not a word since the fight in the study. But in a town like ours, silence never lasts long. Who is it? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Your son, ma'am. He looks upset. I found Terry in his study, poring over paperwork for the foundation he'd recently launched. He looked up the moment I entered, immediately sensing the change in my energy. He's here, I said. Terry set the documents aside and turned his wheelchair to face me fully. Do you want me to handle it? No, I said. He's my son. This is mine to face. I smoothed the front of my dress, exhaling slowly. But I'd like you to be there. If you don't mind, of course, I said. We found Ethan in the formal sitting room, seated stiffly at the edge of a velvet armchair like he was ready to bolt at the first sign of discomfort. He'd lost weight, noticeably so. Dark circles rimmed his eyes, the kind makeup couldn't quite hide. He looked older, worn down. And for a fleeting moment, despite everything, my instincts as a mother stirred. Ethan, I said gently. My voice was careful, neither inviting nor cold. Mom, he replied, arms crossed tightly across his chest. Congratulations on your marriage. I heard it was nice. It was, I said as I took the seat across from him, Terry wheeling beside me and resting his hand lightly atop mine. Simple, but lovely. Ethan's eyes dropped to our hands, to the matching gold bands we now wore. You actually did it. You married him. I did. For better or worse? Ethan asked, bitterness creeping into his tone. Richer or poorer, in sickness and in health? All of it, I said, my voice steady. Every vow, every promise. He let out a harsh, hollow laugh, one that caught in his throat like a sob. You know what the worst part is, he said. I actually thought you might come back. Once the novelty wore off, once you realized what you'd given up, I thought you'd come home. This is my home now, I said softly, glancing at Terry, with him. Ethan looked at Terry with unveiled resentment. With a man you barely know. I know him better than you think, I replied quietly, and more importantly, I know myself better than I did 6 months ago. For a long moment, Ethan said nothing. He stared down at the intricate weave of the carpet beneath his feet, unmoving. When he finally looked up, his eyes shimmered with something I hadn't expected. Grief. I've been thinking about what you said, about Dad, about first loves, and how some things never really end. He inhaled sharply. I went through Dad's papers. After you left, I found some letters. My chest tightened. What kind of letters? Love letters, Ethan said, his voice barely a whisper, to someone named Jennifer, dated 2 years before he died. The words landed like a slap. Dante, my faithful, steady Dante, had been writing love letters to another woman, while I was beside him through chemotherapy, while I held his hand during sleepless nights, while I watched him fade. Terry's hand closed gently over mine, anchoring me. Terry's hand remained wrapped around mine, grounding me, anchoring me as I tried to process the weight of Ethan's words. I'm sorry, he said, voice cracking. I know it hurts, but I thought, you should know. Maybe your marriage wasn't as perfect as I always believed. I closed my eyes, the reality of it settling over me like a wave. It should have broken me, shaken the very foundation of everything I thought I knew about Dante, about our life together. But instead, I felt something unexpected, relief. Thank you, I said quietly. Ethan blinked, startled. You're not angry? I'm sad, disappointed, but not angry. I paused, struggling to put the strange clarity I felt into words. Your father was a good man who made some bad decisions. That doesn't erase the decades we shared, the love we had at the start, but it does put things in perspective. What kind of perspective? The kind that tells me maybe I don't have to tie my whole future to his memory. Maybe I don't have to feel guilty for moving on, for finding happiness again. Ethan began to cry, silent tears slipping down his face. I was so jealous of you, Mom, he admitted, so angry that you could just move forward, start over, smile again. I couldn't understand how you could forget Dad so easily. I didn't forget him, I said gently. I never will. But I couldn't stay frozen in that pain forever. His shoulders shook as his voice cracked. And I made it worse. I was awful to you. I didn't know how to handle the truth. I was hurt and confused, and I blamed you. First for not keeping him faithful, and then for needing too much from me after he was gone. Suddenly, everything about Ethan's behavior made sense. The cold distance, the harsh words, the controlling demands. It hadn't been cruelty for cruelty's sake. It had been pain. Grief. Misdirected, but real. Oh, sweetheart. I stood and sat beside him, wrapping an arm around his shoulders. You should have told me. How could I? He whispered. How could I tell you that the man you gave your life to was lying to you? It wasn't all lies, I said, brushing a hand across his hair like I used to when he was little. There were good years, real love, and there was you, the best thing that ever came out of that marriage. Ethan leaned into me, resting his head on my shoulder. For the first time in months, he felt like my son again, not an adversary, but the child I'd rocked to sleep through thunderstorms. "I've been terrible to you," he murmured. "You've been hurting," I replied. "There's a difference." He pulled back slightly, wiping his eyes. "Can you ever forgive me?" Across the room, Terry sat watching quietly, his gaze full of understanding. He gave me a small nod, his way of telling me to follow my heart. "I forgive you," I said softly, "but things can't go back to the way they were. I'm not the same person I was 6 months ago, and neither are you." Ethan pulled back and looked at me, his eyes searching. "What does that mean?" "It means that if you want to be part of my life, you need to accept my choices. All of them. You need to respect my marriage, my husband, and my right to be happy." "And if I can't?" "Then we'll love each other from a distance," I replied gently but firmly. "Because I won't let anyone, not even you, make me feel ashamed of the life I'm building." The words tasted bittersweet, but they were mine, earned, lived. I wasn't asking for permission anymore. I was asking for respect. Ethan was quiet for a long time, thinking. Finally, he turned to Terry. "I owe you an apology too," he said, his voice quiet. "I said some awful things about you, about your relationship with my mom. I was wrong." Terry inclined his head in acknowledgement. "Grief makes us all say things we don't mean." Ethan hesitated. Do you really love her?" "With everything I have," Terry answered without missing a beat. "I've loved her for 48 years. Finding her again has been the greatest gift of my life." The way he said it, without doubt, without ego, filled the room like sunlight through a storm. Ethan looked between us, watching the way Terry's gaze softened when it landed on me, the way my fingers instinctively laced with his when I was unsure. Slowly, something shifted in Ethan's face. "I can see it," he said, almost to himself. "The way you two look at each other, it's like you're the only people in the world." "Sometimes," I smiled, "it feels that way." Ethan paused again, then asked, "Are you happy, Mom? Really, truly happy?" I thought about everything, about the quiet mornings reading in the sunlit conservatory, the wildflowers Terry still picked for me from the garden, the peace I felt every night falling asleep beside him, knowing whatever time we had left we had together. And more than that, the way he listened, the way he saw me, not as a burden or a responsibility but as a woman still full of life, still capable of being loved. "Yes," I said, my voice firm, "I'm happy." Ethan nodded, then stood. "Then I guess I need to learn to be happy for you." "Does that mean?" "It means I want to try. I want to be part of your life, if you'll let me. I want to get to know Terry as your husband, not just as your employer. And I want to make up for the time I wasted being angry, jealous, and cruel." I stood and wrapped him in a hug, really hugged him, for the first time since Dante's funeral. "I'd like that very much." As he pulled away, Ethan glanced around the elegant living room, then back at me. "This really is your home now." "It is." "And you're really Mrs. Hawthorne?" "I am," I said, smiling. He offered a small smile back, the first genuine one I'd seen from him in over a year. "It's going to take some getting used to. But Mom?" "Yes, you deserve this. You deserve to be loved and cherished and maybe even spoiled a little." He hesitated, his voice soft. "I'm sorry it took me so long to see that." After Ethan left, promising to call soon and asking if he could bring the kids to meet their new step-grandfather, Terry and I sat in the garden watching the sunset spread across the sky in soft gold and rose. "Do you think he means it?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. Terry looked at me, eyes warm. "I think he's trying, and that's all any of us can do." I leaned into him then, not just with my body, but with trust, tentative, healing trust. I leaned my head on his shoulder, the weight of old pain slowly lifting from my heart. Maybe it wasn't too late for healing, for forgiveness. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late for a second chance at joy. "I think she's her mother's daughter," Terry said softly, "which means she's stronger and more forgiving than she gives herself credit for." I leaned back in my chair, feeling the last of the tension finally melt away. For the first time in years, it felt like all the pieces of my life were falling into place. Like a long-forgotten melody finding its rhythm again. Like exhaling after holding my breath for decades. "Terry," I said, turning to him. Thank you. Thank you for fighting for us, for not giving up when things got complicated." He brought my hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "Thank you for taking a chance on an old love. with an older man, for seeing past the wheelchair and all the walls I built around my heart. His voice cracked slightly, not from weakness, but from the weight of gratitude, of love too long held back. We're quite a pair, aren't we? I smiled. Two people in their 70s, starting over like teenagers. The best kind of pair, he replied. The kind who knows how precious love really is and doesn't waste a second of it. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky above the garden, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The pain of losing Dante, the heartbreak of being cast out by my own child, the fear of starting over with nothing but memories and pride. And yet, here I was. Not just surviving, but living. Not just remembered, but chosen. But sometimes I realized you have to lose everything to finally find what you were looking for all along. And sometimes the love you thought was lost forever has just been waiting patiently for you to come home. So the story is over, our wonderful friends. Are you still here, even at this hour? If you are, then maybe, just maybe, something in this story touched your heart. Maybe you saw a part of yourself in Nora's quiet resilience, or in Terry's unwavering love, or even in Ethan's long, stumbling road to understanding. Life has a way of surprising us, doesn't it? Sometimes it breaks us open, scatters our hopes, and pushes us out of everything familiar. But just like Nora, we can find something beautiful in the rebuilding. This story reminds us that starting over isn't failure, it's courage. That love lost doesn't mean love gone forever. And that healing often comes when we least expect it. From the past, from forgiveness, from choosing joy again. There's a quote by Haruki Murakami that says, "What happens when people open their hearts? They get better." And that's what we saw here, people getting better. Not perfect, but better. More honest. More free. So wherever you are right now, whatever you're going through, maybe it's time to ask yourself, what am I still holding back from? What haven't I forgiven? Who am I becoming? If this story stirred something in you, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Not just for us, but so that someone else out there, someone maybe just like you, can find a reason to keep hoping too. Thank you for staying with us till the very last moment. We see you, and we're so glad you're here.